and welcome to People in Profit, where we look at how business shapes our world. I'm Kate Moody. Coming up, 4 months on from the referendum, how is the UK economy weathering its pending split with Europe? And what's the forecast once Brexit proceedings begin? Just how solid are the BRICS? We take a look at the state of the world's emerging economies as they vow to increase their influence on the global stage. And a world without cash. Mobile money is emerging as the new normal in Burma, where banks and ATMs are few and far between, but smartphones are everywhere. First up, it's been 4 months since British voters shocked the markets by deciding to leave the European Union. While the currency has tumbled and investor confidence has been shaken, the unemployment rate has held steady, and the economy itself has proven more resilient than many had predicted. Diptyque Laurent has been looking at the numbers.
4 months after Britain voted to leave Europe, the British currency has taken a pounding, losing 20% of its value against the US dollar. The governor of the Bank of England has downplayed concerns about the free-falling pound.
One of the great strengths of an open economy like the United Kingdom, one of the great strengths of the system we have here, is that the exchange rate adjusts when circumstances adjust.
Another consequence of the Brexit vote, inflation. Consumers are paying more in general for clothes, food and fuel, as inflation stands at 1%, the highest rate in 2.5 years.
You've got producers such as the head of Northern Foods earlier on, so he sees food price inflation at maybe 5% next year. That's going to cut into real disposable income. That in turn is likely to slow the economy.
It's not all bad news though. Consumer confidence has returned to pre-referendum levels, helped by record low interest rates. The Bank of England launched a stimulus program in August and cut interest rates to 0.25% in September, part of measures to shore up the economy. But this could all be fleeting. Economists warn that the real effects of the Brexit will only be felt next year. According to the International Monetary Fund, economic growth will be stronger than expected this year, but will shrink to 0.8% in 2017, while inflation will continue to rise and ultimately weigh on consumer spending.
Now for more, we can speak to Ian Begg of the London School of Economics. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, in the run-up to the referendum, we heard rather dire predictions about what would happen to the UK economy if voters chose Brexit. 4 months on, what's your take on how the economy is faring? Is it reacting as you might have expected?
Well, I think that the economy in the short term was expected to have some kind of difficulties because of uncertainty, because of financial instability, and because investors would be reluctant to invest in the UK economy. We've certainly seen the uncertainty, we've seen the financial instability, notably with the fall in the pound, but so far it doesn't seem to have had a marked effect on economic activity or jobs. Now this may be because not much has happened yet, but also because the authorities, particularly the Bank of England, have reacted with a kind of stimulus to the economy that's prevented things going worse. The long-term projections of Brexit were that things would deteriorate over a 10 to 15-year period. We haven't really started the Brexit process yet, so it's far too soon to say what the outcome will be.
So in the medium term, do you really believe that this is sort of the calm before the storm? Do you think that the deterioration will begin once Article 50 is triggered, or in the longer term?
It's longer term, because the projections that you're referring to were what would happen to the UK economy over a 10 to 15-year period, which was that GDP would be lower than it would otherwise be by somewhere between 2 and 9%. Now what that's saying is that instead of growing by 30% between now and, let's say, 2030, the UK economy might only grow by 21%. It's still growth, but it's lower growth than otherwise. That will only happen as a result of the deal that's done on Brexit, which means it's something that's going to happen in the 2020s rather than over the next 2 or 3 years.
Now, a recent study said that post-Brexit Britain was no longer one of the world's top 5 investment locations. How worried do you think the city should be about its future?
Well, there's investment, which I think you're referring to, the Ernst & Young study, EY study, which showed that potential foreign investors were a bit worried about going to the UK. That's unsurprising, because the uncertainty about what Brexit will mean is a reason not to invest until there's greater clarity about it. that is going to potentially to have a damaging effect on the economy, so that what's likely to happen is that until Brexit is settled, and let's face it, we're at the very early stages of settling it, we won't have a clear picture for foreign investors about what they should do. Now, for the City of London, it's somewhat of a different question, because the City of London is also about day-to-day financial services, not necessarily long-term investment decisions. And it's about the location of particular kinds of economic activity in the UK, banking, insurance, the business services, which are the great specialisation of the City of London. The city still has a huge competitive advantage over major rivals inside Europe, particularly Paris and Frankfurt, maybe also Amsterdam, and it will take a long time for that to erode. But there are some risks, which is why so many in the city are saying, hey, wait a minute, let's think rather more carefully about what kind of Brexit we have.
Do you think the drop in the value of the pound in the months since the Brexit vote has set up a new normal on the currency markets?
Well, we're told as economists in Economics 101, never predict the exchange rate. But having said that, I think that there's a risk that it will become the new normal. It may have been a necessary correction anyway, because the British economy was subject to a huge balance of payments deficit, and one way of dealing with that is to devalue the currency. However, we've been in these levels of currency before, and we've seen them fluctuate back up to €1.40 from today's €1.12. So I would say that there's a range within which it's feasible to see it evolving over the next 2 or 3 years.
How about inflation? Do you think that British consumers will soon start feeling the pinch?
Well, they are already. The latest inflation figures were higher than in previous months. That's maybe a legacy of very low prices the year before. And naturally, when you have a fall in the exchange rate, particularly against the dollar, with so many commodities priced in dollars, that is going to translate into higher fuel costs and higher food costs. So yes, inflation is going to pick up in the UK economy over the coming months if the exchange rate stays at its current level.
Ian Begg of the London School of Economics, thank you so much for speaking to us here on People in Profit.
Thank you.
Now, the world's fastest growing economies are taking on the global establishment. At its 8th annual meeting, the BRICS bloc said that its potential and strength remained unchanged despite a global economic slowdown. It vowed to strengthen cooperation to expand its role on the global stage.
The recovery of the global economy remains fragile. Global trade and investment have slumped. Commodity prices fluctuate. The underlying problems which could trigger a global financial crisis have not been solved.
So just what tools do they have at their disposal, and how are they building their own future? William Hildebrand has been finding out. Will?
Thanks, Kate. Let's begin with looking at who is in the group. That is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and since 2010, South Africa. On the face of it, they may seem unlikely partners, but they do represent about half the world's population and 1/4 of global GDP. Together, they're hoping to challenge Western dominance of global financial institutions. To do so, BRICS created the new development bank. Over the next 5 years, the NDB plans to lend $10 billion towards infrastructure and renewable energy. Some have questioned if it's a rival to the West-dominated World Bank, but BRICS maintains the NDB only exists to complement other international institutions. BRICS also plans to launch a credit ratings agency as an alternative to Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's. The so-called Big Three currently control about 90% of the market. Emerging economies often criticize the Big Three for giving them harsh assessments that raise their borrowing costs. BRICS members have been hit hard by falling oil prices. Brazil and Russia are in recession. There's been slowing growth in China, and investors are clamoring for more reforms in India. For those reasons, there are concerns over BRICS' influence. The bloc may try to strengthen its clout by adding new members. Though some wonder if the global economy may be shifting focus away from BRICS' strength of trade and commodities to services and technology. Last year, Goldman Sachs folded its BRICS fund. Over 5 years, assets peaked at $800 million before dwindling to just $100 million. Kate?
Well, thank you so much for that. Now, how to transfer money when you don't have a bank? That's the question facing much of Burma's population, where ATMs and financial facilities can be difficult to find. As smartphones become more prevalent, the country's new civilian government is banking on mobile money, and a growing number of startups are cashing in. Rochelle Harrison-Pless explains.
For Kim Min-tu, sending money home to rural Burma used to involve long walks or bicycle rides to the nearest bank. Now it's as easy as sending a text. She recently began using a mobile money service which lets her deposit and send cash from her phone with an app, or at small shops like this one.
The advantage is that it now takes very little time to transfer the money. The process will be finished in 10 or 15 minutes, and then the children reply to me that they have received it.
Like 90% of the population, Kim Min-tu doesn't have a bank account. But even for those that do, using them can be tricky. ATMs are few and far between, and residents of this suburb near Yangon have to take a boat to reach the closest branch. Burma's banking sector withered during decades of military dictatorship, and many people still prefer to store their savings under the proverbial mattress or convert them into gold or gemstones.
Building customer trust is going to be the biggest issue here, to my mind. I think there isn't a lot of trust in the financial sector, given the history of demonetisation and bank runs and so on. So, the average consumer generally will feel probably more comfortable keeping their money at home rather than keeping it actually in a bank.
These new banking services have only been made possible by rapid advances in technology. Mobile banking was only given the go-ahead by the government in April, so for now uptake is still quite slow. But with Burma's economy growing at around 8% a year, more and more people are likely to need ways to store and send cash.
That's it for this People in Profit. If you have any questions about the stories we've been covering, you can get in touch on Facebook at France 24 Business, or you can tweet me on Kate A. Moody. Until next time, thanks for watching.